I'm Graham Hunt. I'm just going to tell you a bit about my background and where I've got to be here. The critical thing, I guess, is my very early years. When I was up to the year 7, I lived on a farm just south of Sydney with my parents on an orchard, and they had a very strong social conscience, as well as living in that environment. I developed an affinity with the natural environment, and I think that's sort of lasted right through my life. At school, I moved to the city for high school and studied art, and doing art history developed an interest in buildings, and realised that I would like to work in that area. So after leaving school, I had the opportunity to go to the university and studied architecture at Sydney Uni in the early 70s, way back. But that was very interesting because at that time the architecture course was very radical. It had a very strong environmental focus, and at the same time questioned the social, economic reasons behind architecture. And it made us as students question the role of architects, as well as learning a lot about the impact of buildings on the environment and how to design them to work well within the environment. As a result of finishing that course, after 4 years getting a Bachelor of Science in Architecture, I became dissatisfied with the profession and went bush, I guess, to try and find myself and get more in touch with the natural environment. Went and lived in the Upper Hunter Valley for about 6 years, learning how to grow vegetables, live off the land, and also learning how to work in a physical manner, building farm buildings, fences, yards, and I ended up building houses with a concrete contractor who was very keen to develop the idea of concrete houses as a new approach to home building for Australia. He had some very innovative ideas where he was trying to build eskies, basically concrete walls with lots of insulation in them using natural materials. And because of my study, I had the knowledge of how to do passive solar design and was able to incorporate that in the designs. We did a couple of houses. Unfortunately, capital was a restriction, and that never went very far. But as a result of doing that and building a couple of other houses, I realised that I need to get back to do architecture seriously. So I went back to university in Newcastle to do the final degree for 2 years. And that was a different approach to Sydney University. Newcastle University was much more of a nuts and bolts approach. And I learned a lot of very pragmatic things about the actual process of designing and documentation and those sort of things. As a result of graduating from there, I worked in conventional architecture for a few years, and after a while got disenfranchised with that. I'd never really travelled, and so I decided it was time to do that, and I went as a volunteer to work in Africa, a place called Botswana. And I worked there for 5 years with a research and development organisation in a very small version of the CSIRO, and they actually had an architecture unit that was looking at issues like appropriate climatic design for the area, appropriate building materials, and we did a lot of buildings using natural materials, thatch, mud brick, as well as more sophisticated materials. And we did research projects, actually measuring the performance of the houses and using software for thermal prediction in the actual design of them. And that set me on a whole new course. It was 5 years of work. I feel now it's equivalent to have done a master's and or a PhD. I, as a result, wrote quite a few technical papers. I went to quite a few conferences internationally to present papers. After a while, I got homesick for Australia and came back and got back again into conventional architecture there were limited opportunities to build on the experience I had in Africa. But there did start in New South Wales a home energy rating scheme.
When was that?
That was around 1999, late 90s. Because I had experience in this area from my work in Africa, I signed up to that, did the training, and started doing that as a sideline, and developed quite a speciality in that. And so in the last 10 years I've built up my expertise in that area, learning other rating tools for commercial buildings, and also doing home energy assessments. But at the time, still working for conventional architects and doing this on the side. In 2003, I went and worked with a specialist firm concentrating in sustainable design, and that was Carolyn Pidcock Architects. Worked there for 3 years and further developed my expertise. But then felt it was time that I got out and did it on my own. I had started doing house designs for friends and family on a sort of private basis, but it was now time to do it myself. So since 2006 I've had my own practice and have been doing quite a few designs of houses and alterations and additions, but also as much consulting back to other architects on sustainable design and doing environmental ratings for them. I mentioned that a lot of my work is working with other architects. I assist them with providing advice about sustainability in building and construction. I also do environmental ratings for them. For regulatory requirements such as BASIX in New South Wales, I do thermal comfort assessments, which is assessing the thermal performance of a house or a building. For commercial buildings, I do Green Star ratings. I also do what are called Part J assessments, which is checking the energy efficiency of a commercial building against the regulations. Quite often people come to me, other architects, because they like to deal with another architect rather than someone who is just an assessor or an engineer. They feel like perhaps have a better understanding of their design intent. But sometimes people come and they want to do more than just the regulatory requirements. They want to push the boundaries. Sometimes I disappoint them because by the time they pass the regulations, they've probably gone further than they thought they would have. But still, that's a growing area and there's certainly more interest in that. As part of my interest in this area, outside work, I'm involved in a couple of organisations. I'm the State Secretary of the Australian New Zealand Solar Energy Society and get involved in that in doing meetings, helping to disseminate information about renewable technologies, and we get involved in events such as Sustainable House Day. I'm also involved in the Alternative Technology Association, which has a similar bent, and I also participate in the Institute of Architects Sustainability Committee. As a result of being involved in those groups, I'm finding recently I get invited to participate in events such as environmental fairs, but also giving talks and presentations on issues such as solar hot water, use of solar panels or passive solar design. I find that really interesting, and I feel that's probably in some ways the most effective work I do in terms of addressing the big issue of climate change, because I'm able to get out and talk to